So let me know if there's a loud rumble. I turned on the air conditioner because it was starting to get warm in here. So.
Okay, Mark, you're live. Welcome. You want to give an introduction to who's on the call?
Oh, excellent. Yeah.
We're recording and good, go.
Welcome, everyone. Mark Edelman again, program delivery partner from Northern California for First Tech Challenge. I have Jeff Greene and Rick Swan joining us to be able to help us go through and do sort of an overview of the game, answer any questions, talk about the field, sort of an open-ended set of questions and answers. Jeff has been one of, I guess, backing up a little bit, one of my responsibilities is I'm part of the game design committee for the program. And as part of that, I'm the chief referee for the world. I've been lucky enough to have Jeff join me in Houston as one of my division head referees for the last handful of years. I keep trying to convince Rick to come join the fun at the championships, but I haven't got him there yet. But Jeff and Rick have been responsible really over the last, 10 years, maybe longer, of helping develop the referee pool in Northern California. So they are two of my most experienced head referees, and they provide a good balance to my side with understanding the game rules from a development perspective, and their side from implementation side. With that, this is really sort of a question and answer session. The goal really is to try to give everybody as much information as we can. You know, going through a kickoff presentation from first can be a little bit like drinking from a fire hose. And so we're trying to turn down the water pressure a little bit and give you guys a chance to sip and learn. So with that, questions?
Okay, I've got quite a few queued up from this morning's session, so let's start with those, and then then we'll go into the ones, the 6 or 7 that just popped in. So in the end game, can we put the wobble goal on the starting line for 5 points, then pick it up and put it into the drop zone for another 20 points?
So it's good to look at the game manual, understand live scoring versus end of period scoring. So that's one that fits into end of period scoring. So the value for the wobble goal is where is it at the end of the period, which in this case is end of the game. So it will only score one of those two values, not both.
Okay. If we play in the half field, how do we get a middle score slot? So I think this is a common question. I think there's like 8 of them that have been asked now.
So I know it's a little bit mysterious, and the stream this morning did not talk about the remote game much at all. Take a little bit of time and read both the traditional game manual and the remote game manual. So that's game manual part 2. There are some minor differences between the way the gameplay works. So you're right. Normally in the traditional game, the tower goal has 3 sections: an upper goal, a middle goal, and a lower goal. 2 of them belong to the alliance color that matches the backboard. The other belongs to the opposing alliance. In the remote game, they all 3 belong to the team playing the match. So you still have 3 potential targets to shoot at. It's just one of them happens to be wrong colored, but in some sense, the alliance color doesn't really matter anymore in the remote game.
And we can let Rick and Jeff pop in on questions as well.
Yeah, I tend to be a little bit of a motor mouth, and so you guys should feel free to interrupt me and interject.
Presumably, they're people who are planning their autonomous programs should plan for the possibility that they have to care about that middle goal being the wrong color at some point in the future.
And if you're a smart team, you can look down at the bottom of that tower goal and see there's a vision target there. The vision targets on the field are unique. And so you could know from your Vuforia code exactly which goal you're looking at. So it might be a quick and easy adaptation if you take advantage of those cues.
There's some randomization in the field. How do we know where to put the wobble goal and how many of the rings to start with? How does that work in a remote event?
So remote event and traditional event have both the same basic starting configuration of the field. There's the starting line, starter line. This line, a robot must start so that it crosses the line and is touching the rear wall. The wobble goal, when the teams come to the field, will be positioned at the end of the line. The rule for the wobble goal is it has to be touching or possessed by the robot. There are 3 rings. I've got 3 here. I'll use this other stack because you can kind of see it. I have 3 rings. They're ideally going to start just outside the field, adjacent to the start line. Those are the preloaded rings. Teams may load 0, 1, 2, or 3 of them. The rings that they don't load will get given to the human player for introduction in the game during the driver control period. But so that's the basics of it. That's the starting configuration. The one other aspect of the randomization, there's this stack of rings called the starter stack. And it's going to have 3 different sizes, and that controls which of the 3 target zone goals you're looking to deliver the wobble goal to during the autonomous period. So it either starts off with 0 rings, and so that would be target zone A, or it starts with 1 ring, so that would be target zone B, or it starts with 4 rings, and that would be target zone C. Right, and so again, if you pay attention and look through your SDK, you'll find that there's TensorFlow code already developed and built into the library that allows you to do that recognition with a camera. There are certainly other ways of being able to do that identification, but there's one sort of already packaged for you.
Mark, how does a team actually know which it starts in?
So the scoring system, as part of the match preparation, will do the randomization of the field. So it has effectively a dice roll built into it that takes care of what configuration should be used.
That's embedded in FTC Live. Is that the software that you're talking about?
Precisely.
So I get ready to start a match. I start FTC Live on a different laptop that has internet access.
I'm not sure what you mean by different laptop.
So if you have the development laptops that, I guess you no longer need. It has nothing to do with
the match.
Right,
yeah, it has nothing to do with the match.
Okay, so you can still use just one laptop. Okay.
When theoretically, you could use that laptop for doing the match control as well, right? So there's not a real specific definition of what laptop has to be used, but you need a device that can run the FTC Live software. What exactly that device needs to be is somewhat of an open question, but it needs to be a device that can run the FTC Live software. And I know at least some part of it is internet-based this year.
There's some questions around camera angles, and in particular, if you want to talk through the technical setup and maybe what you've learned about where to put a camera, lighting, anything that you've done, particularly as we encourage teams to do video recording.
Yeah. So video recording isn't a requirement. So you may have heard me talk a little bit earlier about fair play. I care a lot about fair play. I'll switch gears here and we'll talk about what's it doing to me. I'm trying to play with my technology. So we'll talk about fair play. So we're trying to encourage all of the NorCal teams to go ahead and record all the videos for all their matches, right? It's one way of helping each other feel very positively about what we're all encouraging, right? It's one way of making everybody feel good. Camera angles are funny. So the camera I'm working with right now is a GoPro HD Hero 5. I have a handful of GoPros to work with. This one I picked because it allowed me to change the field of view. So I have a little bit of distortion. This is what's called the wide normal. I don't remember which. The wide one gave me a huge distorted look to the field. This one only has a little bit of distortion. I kind of like this. The camera itself is sitting about 6 feet off the floor and about 1.5 feet outside the field. I picked this particular angle partially because this is my garage And that black you see around the two sides, that's 35 feet of green screen cloth. And I didn't want to spend any more money on buying green screen cloth, so I can't cover the whole garage. So that other wall, it has my bikes on it and a little bit of camera gear and a few other things. It's ugly. So we've got everything hidden over here behind the green screen. From a camera perspective for, like, for example, documenting the match from a referee's view, ideally the referees are going to be standing in a traditional match somewhere immediately next to the tower goal, right? So they're going to be a little bit more focused on the backside of the goal. What the ideal camera angle is, I don't know. In some sense, the videos that we're asking people to record aren't really supposed to be uber precise. They're supposed to be a good representation. I don't need to see everything. I need to see enough to make, me being whoever in our community. We don't need to see everything. We need to see enough to believe with complete, complete believability that what you're saying is absolutely true, with the scores that you post. So I expect that this is something, camera angles is something that will evolve as we go. We'll learn more. So here in my garage, lighting-wise, it's a little bit challenging. There are 4 can lights in the ceiling. I have 2 windows on my non-covered wall that have honeycomb shades in them. And I do have 1 LED spotlight that I've shown into the corner to help fill in the light in the darkest corner of the green screen. Turns out not all green screens are the same color green, and shadows fool chroma key quite easily. But you get a little effect over in the corner on the left side of the Fair Play logo. You can see the little white streaks. That's green that doesn't look green to the camera.
So while we're talking about cameras, I think it would be wonderful for a few of the senior teams to film their practice matches and to put a few up there, just so the rest of the world gets to see A, how great you are, and B, get some ideas that can help the junior teams.
Well, and to that point, right, we need to support each other as we go through this season. This is an unprecedented season. We've never had anything like this before. And, your team, as you were growing and developing, learned from seeing other teams. Well, there's a whole lot of teams that aren't going to have that opportunity this year unless you do like what Rick said and share some of what you're doing now. Share as much as you can, early, often. Right? It's to everybody's advantage.
And particularly sharing the technical setup, right? So which camera, what lighting, if you have exterior lighting, or if you're just using, standard lighting. So the background picture that Mark is chroma keying in is from the first championship from a few years ago, where they had a very high resolution panorama, if you haven't searched for it. So I did some snipping. I don't know if we got any NorCal people in there, but a couple people have piped up saying that that they think they see themselves. They recognize the location and the time, so it's quite amusing. But anyway,
so
we'll move on.
Somewhere maybe around the corner, Jill and I are sitting together.
Yeah, exactly, around the corner somewhere. I've elevated Rick and Jeff to also see the questions. So those are all of the questions we had from this morning. Let's move
Excellent.
into the questions from this afternoon. And so I think looking at, just a lot of it, there's a lot of questions around the rings. How compressible? What are they made of? Can they be smashed, folded, mutilated?
So here's our wonderful ring. It's somewhere around 5 inches in diameter and roughly 3/4 inch thick. If I was going to describe it to you, the closest thing I could think of to describe would be stress ball. So it is soft, it's foamy. It's not real soft, so it is squishable. You can certainly bend it. It's got that same sort of a skin over it that a lot of stress balls do. So, that's it in a nutshell. It is compressible. It's not going to squish. It does recover quite well. right? So if there's 180 pounds of squish and it's doing just fine, we do expect them to be pretty durable. So Andy Mark did some sanitizing tests to figure out what might happen if you tried to wipe it with things. So Danny and Andy Mark rubbed it with alcohol. And depending upon how long you left the alcohol on, it got a little bit of a blistered look. But as that alcohol evaporated and went away, the blisters all healed back down. So paying attention to keeping them clean, depending upon your team's environment, is going to be important. It is part of why for the shared field we're talking about setting up at our building, that we're going to ask you to bring your own rings and your own Wobble Goals, right? So that minimizes all of the sanitizing that we have to do in terms of sharing those resources across teams. And yes,
Jeff, do you want to
wobble.
Yeah, do you want to
nice.
take a couple of the questions? I think you can see them now.
Yeah, I'm just reading them now to figure out how I can mark them as read and or answered versus not answered. So give me a moment.
While you guys are doing that, I can describe the field.
Yeah, just give us a second. Let me explain to Jeff and Rick. So you can do, so you type in your answer at the bottom of the question box. You should see a send to all. It doesn't look like a button, but it really is. So just click on the send to all, and that actually answers that question, and then you can uncheck show to answered questions, or we can just talk through them, which is kind of a good thing instead of a lot of reading.
Well, the difference is the recording won't show any of the text answers.
Correct.
So we can certainly post the question log in addition to the video. Either way works fine. Depends on the volume.
Yep. So let's go through the field, and then we'll let Rick and Jeff sort through the 50 questions or so that are in there. Maybe a little exaggeration, but go ahead.
What I set up in my garage is the remote field. So turns out Jill and I bought a 100-year-old house, and it came with a garage appropriate for automotive trends 100 years ago. One car, who'd have thought? So this is an 8-foot wide, like 12-foot long field. It's made up of the standard panels from the traditional field, just with one panel removed from each the front and rear of the field. We debated on doing a 6-foot wide field versus an 8-foot wide field. This presented more opportunity for teams that have perimeters to be able to take advantage of them, but it also gave a little bit more opportunity for the random behavior of the rings. Right? Part of the gameplay is rings have to be reintroduced to the field, and so they go where they're going to go. So if we shrink the field, we don't necessarily have that same level of randomization. So we really wanted to have it. This is sort of the ideal setup. There is everything from this all the way down to just tape on the floor, creating a boundary, not a perimeter, a boundary, tape for all of the scoring and other field markings, and cardboard boxes cut in the appropriate way to make up an analog to the tower goal and to the power shot. Right? The guides on how to do that, or I don't know if they've been published yet. I've seen the drafts of them. They do seem to be quite doable. And doing the cardboard version of that power goal and power shot structure is like $12, $13. Right? Go to Home Depot or Lowe's and buy boxes of a specific size and cut them in specific ways and tape them together, and you got a low cost field. Other things of note, the full field has 5 target images. This field currently just has 3, right? So normally there would be a target image on both the red and the blue tower goal. There's a target image on the red Alliance Station wall, on the blue Alliance Station wall, and one on the audience wall. It's important if you're setting up a partial field not to put the images that don't fit in. So as an example, if you put the blue tower goal image in here, that's going to confuse the software, right? The software understands the image as being in a particular place on the field. If you put the image on the sort of half field wall instead of where it should be on the blue Alliance Station wall, it's 4 feet in the wrong position. So all of the measurements that the software does would be off by 4 feet. And it's more complicated when there's angles involved.
Can I set up a full field for remote field play, or do I have to set it up for this for remote field?
So I'm not sure it's expressed in the manuals that you can't set up a full field. I would not. So from the perspective of the random behavior of the rings, there's a little bit of an advantage to having a small field. The rings don't go as far, right? They're constrained to only going, somewhere in this 8-foot back and forth. If you have a 12-foot wide field, they're going to go sliding off to the other side, and you're potentially losing out on that. I think looking at the remote field requirements doc would probably be the place to really understand that. It currently defines the field as 12 foot by 8 foot. So my gut instinct would be to say, no, we should be thinking about the partial field, right? It's a 1 robot on a 12 by 8, not a 1 robot on a 12 by 12.
And you can set up either red or blue, right? You don't have to set up red?
That's correct. I did red. I'm a little bit of a borrowed trouble. The materials that make up the goal are several different pieces that have to be folded in particular ways. So there's a whole bunch of chloroplast in here in a couple different sheets, and it's all pre-scored for the blue side. So I wanted to understand the difficulties of trying to do the red side. And so I intentionally picked what I thought was going to be the harder one. But the blue one somewhere right over here. Oh, here it is. There's my blue tower goal right there. It's just not built yet. Yeah, it's still in the box. So the field does come in 3 boxes. 2 of them are identical. They contain the tower goals and half a field of game elements. And then the 3rd box contains the pieces used to do the protective netting. It's a little hard to see from the camera angle I have right now, but there is a roughly 2 foot by 4 foot piece of protective netting in the corner next to the goal. There'd be one in the other corner next to the blue tower goal, and then there'd be one strand straddling between. So I haven't put this one up yet, mostly because it needs to hang on to the blue tower goal in order to be stable, and so it isn't there yet. I am working on putting together something that could be there in place of the blue tower goal as a stand-in, but haven't finished it yet. It was something that, I just got my field a few days ago, Monday, Tuesday, and haven't had a chance to really play with it completely yet. So this is still a work in progress. Time will tell whether or not we get something. I would say probably first we'll make some sort of official statement on what they recommend.
For remote, given your one team on there, can you just avoid setting up the nets overall?
Yeah, you can. There's no requirement for the nets. The nets do provide, again, a little bit of benefit. If your robot is shooting wild, you're not going to shoot your human player. You're not going to shoot your match observer. And your rings aren't going to necessarily then go shooting out the back of the field. It depends a lot on what's in your environment, how much space you have, how far the rings can travel. Right? Your match on a remote field will only have 10 of them. If you shoot 8 of them out of the field and somebody has to be running them down, that's less for your robot to be able to play with.
And then somebody asks, so I have a full field set up already. Can I place a perimeter on both 12-foot sides so the donuts don't roll over to the other side? So over to the blue side. So if I'm setting up a red field, but I already have a full field set up and I don't really want to disassemble it, there's some way that you make it so that you're effectively reducing it in the way that's shown here?
You could, but you can't make two fields out of it. And so if you can figure out how to create a 12-foot long, 1 foot high barrier that can be placed in where this offside wall would go, then yeah, that would work okay. But you can't make two fields out of it, right? There's no way to have a red and a blue at the same time. Now, if you did that, that might be one way. If it's movable, that might be one way to be able to practice both blue side and red side.
So besides the beginning part of the match, where there's some randomness and the robot has to score those 0, 1, or 4 rings in the 3 red boxes, where else are the red boxes on the field being used for? Is it in the end game, or how does that actually work again? So there's some questions around the 3 red boxes on the field.
So 3 red boxes on the field, they're mostly about the autonomous period, right? I don't think they play a scoring wobble goals delivered. Yep. I don't think these play any scoring benefit other than in the autonomous period. I do believe there's some protections for the wobble goal when it is in one of those zones. Right? So it's not a scoring, but it is a protection. That wouldn't apply to the remote game. That would only apply to the traditional game, though.
And can one robot possess both of the wobble goals during a remote game?
So not at the same time, but sequentially, yes. That is why the minimum set has 2. We recognize that even in a traditional match, it's highly likely that one robot's going to be better than the other at playing the wobble goal. And so don't hamstring the alliance by requiring each robot to do it. We said, okay, fine. If they want to divide and conquer in different ways, let's allow them. And so in the remote game, we're still allowing for that potential, right? If your robot can do both of them in the last 30 seconds of the match, great, you got a nice robot.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over now on gameplay, Jeff and Rick. So Jeff, you want to get started, maybe answer a couple, and then Rick can answer a couple. We'll give Mark a little bit of a break, and then we'll go back to any field-related questions.
Yeah, sure. So I have a question here that's about end game and difference in the wording for the wobble goal delivery drop zone.
Okay.
Essentially, there's a wording difference around the traditional game that it doesn't include the language about raising the wobble goal over a barrier, and in the remote it does. My thinking when I read that is that it's making explicit that you have to have a wall despite the otherwise available affordances for field construction in remote games. So they're just saying you have to have a wall there in order to lift over the wall, not just deliver to outside the field.
Exactly. The traditional game, there's a perimeter. So there's a built-in barrier. In a remote game, there may not be any barriers. There may not be any perimeter. There may just be barriers. It could be just tape on the floor. So specifically for that task, you do have to lift it over something. And we've talked about things, it could be as simple as you put a cardboard box that's cut down to the 12-inch height, and your robot just takes and drops that into the box. That's the same level of difficulty as lifting it over the wall.
And the next one is about during autonomous, are we allowed to score the rings that are on the field at the beginning of the match for points? And I believe the answer is yes, you can. And yes, there is a difference in potential points score between the different randomizations, but it's supposed to wash out in the end with the total number of randomizations that occur.
And remember that in the remote game, while there's 10 on the field pre-match, right, there's 3 at each starter line and 4 in the stack. By the time the match starts, there will be a maximum of 7 on the field, right? Because the that are from the unused stack, they're going to go into the tower goal to be used during the driver control period.
Here's another fun one. Since there is no ring possession limit for rings on the Wobble Goal, is it legal to use the Wobble Goal as ring storage in Teleop? Well, no.
Exactly.
Because you can't score rings on the Wobble Goal until endgame. So that doesn't seem like it would be a viable strategy. Is there any more nuance to that, Mark?
Nope, you nailed it. So I like the short answer. No.
I'm curious about this question as well. Can you put the rings on the Wobble Goal after it's placed out of the field, or is it exclusively before you place it out of the field?
Either way. It's not specified when they get on there, just that at the end of the match, are they on there?
And then that also answers the next question, at least in my list. You can put some rings on the Wobble Goal and lift it out during end game, and that's acceptable. You can mix and match.
And Rick, do you want to talk through some of the questions? I think you've been answering them publicly, but as we've noted, they don't get captured in the. So do you want to summarize some of the answers that you've given?
Sure. I just now have to show my answered questions. Are they compressible? Yes, we saw Mark stand on them with 180 pounds. Sure, they're compressible, and they can. Their elasticity allows them to return. How is a mid goal scored in remote? I think that got covered. In the remote games, you can score all goals on your side of the field. There is no other side. How do you know which area to put the wobble pole in? The wobble pole can go on either side of either of the starting lines. I think that's what they were asking here. Let me switch down to some more answered questions. By the way, Jeff, I've been copying your answer into the show answered questions. So let me understand the system a little bit. Nobody can see these except if during texting. There's not a capture of this Q&A.
So we get a log that we can download, and so we can add that to the materials we publish, but it doesn't show up in the video. So everybody that's currently on the webinar sees the answers if they're paying attention to the question marks.
I got it. And certainly these are not the final answers. For that, you have to go to the forum Q&A, just so everyone is clear about that.
That's a great reminder. Official answers come from official sources, and although we've got a great body of experience here, these are not official answers.
Mark, can you show us how hard it is to score? How fast can you have to wing one of those, what are being affectionately called donuts? He's an ultimate Frisbee player in a former life, and I think he needs to like brush up on his skills. There we go. Thank you.
Former life. I'm still alive. I'm not dead. So I will confess, I have been advocating for a flying disc game in FTC for 7-8 years, and we finally got one.
Another question here, is the remote allowed to be next to the human player rack while the human player is putting rings in it? I say yes, however, the rings have to hit the floor before they touch your robot. Looking through for some more interesting questions. A lot of these are repeats. If you who are asking questions, you want to browse through the whole set yourself.
I think there's a general theme of questions about what is the human player allowed to do, and similar, or basically asking for clarification. Are the rules like they were last year, where the human player is only allowed to like score when the robot's in certain places, or are they allowed to do it all the time? And I'm pretty positive that the answer is they can return rings all the time, because the robot's not supposed to reach out to where the human player is.
Right. So that's the difference between what's happening this year versus last. Last year, the human player actually had to reach into the field to deposit the stone. And so that was inherently a risky maneuver. Here, the slot that the human player is putting the ring into to bring it back onto the field is like 12 to 18 inches away from the perimeter. And so there's not a problem with the safety aspects of that. So the human player station itself is a taped out region that goes behind the power shot and behind the tower. Unfortunately, my garage isn't quite big enough. There's a rack of boxes behind there that prohibits me from being able to tape that out, but that's where that would be. So there is a specific station for the human player. In addition to returning the rings, the human player is also responsible for managing the power shots. So if during the autonomous period, one or more of them get scored, the human player, I'm going to turn off the, you can see them a little bit better. Now you can see my 35 feet of green screen. If one or more of these is scored during the autonomous period, sometime during the driver control period and before the end game begins, the human player is responsible for resetting them so that they can be scored during the end game.
Another question here, can you move the second wobble goal for additional points during the remote competition? I'm guessing that during the remotes, you only have one wobble goal.
Actually, we can use both of them. So they are both available for the one robot to score.
Okay, very good. I will answer that.
So if people are interested at closer looks at any of the pieces on the field, I do have a handheld camera that I can walk around with. Jeff and Rick helped me test some of my technology last night, and Jeff warned me that if I didn't move slowly, I might make some of you sick. And so we'll try to move slowly if we get the handheld out.
I think there were some questions about what the Wobble Goal is made of.
Okay. So the Wobble Goal is basically 4 fundamental parts. So there's a large injection molded plastic bottom. It has a tray built into the top of it, and there's a piece of the same Euroboard. So that's the aluminum, ABS aluminum sandwich sheet that's been used in the fields for many years. So this is an aluminum composite sheet. It's held into the base with these little push rivets. Let's see if I have one still not installed. These tiny little push rivets. So they do a pretty good job. You have to be careful in aligning the holes up to make them all fit. And then the center pipe is just a piece of styrene piping. Its outside diameter is roughly the same as 3/4 inch PVC, but the inside's a little different because it's this thinner plastic. And then there's a little end cap that fits on the whole thing to make it not sharp and make it look a little nicer.
When you move the wobble goal out of the perimeter, do you have to keep the rings on the wobble, or is it okay if they get knocked off? I think that goals, those are in-game values, so if they're not there at the end of the game, they don't score.
Right.
Hey Mark, can you throw some rings at some solid objects so that people can see how they bounce and react?
Maybe against the garage door as well.
Yeah, the garage door is not really in the camera view.
Yeah. Hopefully that's answered that question.
They're a little bouncy. It's not like a super ball, but they do rebound a little bit.
And Bob France has a fun rules stickler question for us. Verifying that the top 3 rings in the 4-ring starter stack are considered supported by the floor regarding the minor penalty requiring support by the floor.
So that rule for touching the floor only applies to rings that have come out of the return rack. And so by construction, the rings in the starter stack have never left the field for the match. Once they've left the field and are reintroduced through the return rack, then they have to touch the floor before they can be scored again.
And just a little nuance on that, if there are 4 rings in the starter rack, a robot cannot pick them all up at once. They'd be controlling more than 3.
Oh, isn't that a wonderful nastiness? It's almost like game designers think about little gotcha things.
That's not nice.
Game design giveth, game design taketh away.
Yeah, well, rule number 1, the kids are always smarter than we think they are.
Someone asked about a DIY for remote competition. I think that's exactly why the DIY exists, is not just for practice, but for your remote event play.
We understand completely. We, now meaning the game design committee, understands completely that the remote event structure presents a hardship for some teams. And that's why there is this sort of minimum required field and game elements that can be created, right? So with a roll of tape and $20 in boxes from Home Depot and $58 worth of rings and Wobble Goals, you can create a field that you can play. And the DIY guide does also include, supports for the various images, right? So that even those can be created, including creating the barrier that you need to lift the Wobble Goal over for endgame. So all out of cardboard.
So I've got a question here. How many points does someone get if they program the robot to pick up the Wobble Goal, drop it in the drop zone, pick it up, and then repeat until the end of the game? And I think that this is important to call out, so that to remind people of that end of game scoring as things come to a rest. The Wobble Goal scoring is only scored once. You don't achieve the points for placing the Wobble Goal. You achieve the points for the Wobble Goal's location when the time runs out. So
correct.
That would not be a viable strategy to gain infinite points. That would simply be moving extra things around.
So if you actually take and look at the game manual in section 4, the scoring table actually now has a column that says when scored. So there's scored live, end of period references for every scoring activity. But this is something new we did to help try to minimize these kind of questions from teams and from referees. But so take a look at that scoring table. That'll help make it succinct and in one easy to look up table.
And there's a series of questions around the human player returning the rings back into the arena. Can they return them anytime in any direction? And the answer is yes, anytime during Teleop, but not any direction.
With a caveat, they're expected to return them efficiently, right? So the hoarding them is prohibited. I forget exactly, there's a whole long list of conditions that the human player has to meet. So can't do it before driver controlled period, has to use the rack. Storing of rings is not allowed during the driver control period. Rings should be returned to the playing field as quickly as practical. So they can return them at any time, but they can't store them. Which
and
implies
the bit about direction is covered by the return rack. So you're not just chucking them back in the field. They're rolling out into the field on a slide, basically, a ring slide thing.
Right. Well, let me see if I can get this to work. So move
Let's be
slowly,
explicit.
Jeff.
We'd like the rings returned within a couple of seconds.
So this is the ring return rack. So you can see there's a structure on the side of the goal. And so there's a small slot in the back that is where the rings go in. and then they roll down the ramp and out. Ring in, ring out. And so that's the expectation. That is the only way rings can legally be reintroduced. Oh, see that? There's my bikes. Shouldn't have done that.
Yes. Now that you see all of our garage.
Yes.
Back to the green screen.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of questions and confusion around, again, the middle section of that upright. So in a remote event, ignore the colors. Is that right?
Exactly. So we considered having Andy Mark package up two different versions of the tower goal, an all red one and an all blue one. And then we figured out that was going to cause teams additional cost, right? So every different version of field that they have to sell requires additional storage, additional labor, additional planning, additional materials. So that was just going to boil down to costing teams more money. And so, you know, there's enough problems with funding this year. Didn't make any sense to do. So, you know, if you're really bothered by it, take some gaffer's tape and cover those middle tubes up with the appropriate color. But other than that, for the remote game, it's all mine. Toddler's laws, all mine.
So there's a safety question here. If hit by a ring at around 10 to 15 miles an hour, would it hurt? I'm not sure that the would it hurt part is the important part of that question, but is there a speed limit on how fast you can chuck these rings?
I don't know that we expressly put a speed limit in. In some years, we've had a projectile rule. Rings that leave the field anywhere other than over the back wall will involve penalties.
So in a remote match, if you have built your ring return out of cardboard and you pitch a ring fastball that takes out your ring return, that seems like that would be the upper bounds limit on how fast you can throw rings.
Yeah. So in general, I think teams are going to figure out that fast-moving rings are disadvantageous. Using the bare minimum speed gives you much more probability that the ring is actually going to deflect in a desirable direction instead of just straight back. The faster you shoot it, the more elastic it behaves instead of inelastic. An inelastic collision with this tube, it's going to deflect. An elastic collision, it's going to compress and bounce back. So you're going to likely find that overpowering your shooter is a net negative. And really, the longest shot you got is 12 feet, maybe a little bit more, maybe as many as 13 feet.
Can a robot put two rings in the goal at the same time?
That's the possession limit.
So you can take all three rings and fling them through at the same moment in time, and you are good to go.
So I'm a robot during the autonomous period. I was preloaded with three. I come over and I put them into the low goal. Good. So the low goal is the only one you can score from outside of the launch zone. So this white line is called the launch line. Everything from the launch line to the audience side of the field is considered the launch zone. You have to be in the launch zone to score into the middle or high goals.
So talk about what happens. So talk about what happens when you're not in the launch zone and you do score and the offsetting penalties.
Yeah, so because we have two different officials basically in the traditional game, because we have two different officials basically managing scoring versus penalties, we went with it still counts as scored, but you get a penalty that's more costly than the value you just scored.
Right.
Net negative.
So I know we're a little bit over time. We got at least one person reminding us, if not more, that we said we would end at 2. There was a question around game animation and video. All of that was done by FIRST this morning. So if you haven't seen it, I'm sure it's on the firstinspires.org webpage, as well as there's been updates to Game Manual 1. Obviously, Game Manual 2 has been released. We have a bunch more questions in the queue, but probably we'll have to answer them on our website. I don't know, Jeff or Rick, if there's anything that you feel is super critical to answer right this moment. Otherwise, we can probably wrap things up.
I'm good.
Yeah, I think I'm good too.
So we are planning Ask an Expert series. Mark, do you know when those will get started? Because there are questions around scoring and people want to make sure that they are in the fair play scoring properly. Is that in a couple weeks, or do we have an idea?
So don't have an idea yet. So some of it is just lining up the Ask an Experts. I twisted Rick and Jeff's arms a little bit last night. We'll twist a little bit more today. So some of it depends upon how much workload we can get out of volunteers, right? With the YPP requirements, I can't have a single volunteer staff one of these sessions. I have to have at least 2. Now, they don't necessarily both have to be the expert, but there have to be 2 volunteers on every one of these calls. So, trying to figure out and coordinate a schedule of a judging call, a referee call, FTA CSA call, an inspection call, it's a lot to figure out. Additionally, FIRST is planning a series of train the kids kind of calls, specifically with respect to the officiating, right? Making sure that the kids understand the philosophy of how we look at penalties and scoring. Kids tend to be greedy. I never committed any fouls. There's no penalties, and every shot I take is good, right? It's a part of being a kid, and that's okay. We want them to try to understand more fully. So I'm actually quite encouraged that people are saying, "Hey, how do we make sure we can be part of fair play?" That makes me happy. So stay tuned. Make sure you're part of the Google group. Announcements will come.
Great. Thanks for that. Thank you very much to all of our presenters today. I know we've got people around, not around the world, but definitely in remote locations today. So this has been a fun day for us. I know I've appreciated. Mark, any final words from FTC guy other than be safe?
Yeah, stay safe.
I think that's a good summary. Thanks, everybody.
Goodbye.
Okay, stopping the recording.